If I had a nickel for every time I made one of these The Day It Died videos on a sitcom, only to have to do it again for its late-in-life, short-lived sequel, I would have 2 nickels. Which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right? Let's be honest, How I Met Your Father was Nepotism the Show, a newer series desperately trying to coast off the coattails of its more successful and more interesting parent. How I Met Your Mother was a beloved series with a less-than-beloved series finale. But the finale had a lot of finality to it. It may not have been the end that some fans wanted, but it was a very definitive end nonetheless, giving us send-offs for each of the series' leads and flash-forwards and time skips, making any and all sequels unnecessary and damn near impossible. Ted's story had come to an end. So instead, it was decided to tell someone else's story and just give it a similar naming structure. But in an effort to further tie itself into the success of that first show, the show was made to share a canon with its predecessor, taking place in between the events of the show and the events of the show's ending. Which means any time that we see our returning characters, they're kind of stuck in this limbo. They can't progress as people yet because we're not at that part of their story. So we get our series leads at low points and stuck in the in-between. Now, this is okay for characters like Carl or the Captain, and even more so for Sandy Rivers. These were side characters that did very little advancing, as they were really just pawns of the plot rather than plot points. Their returns are very welcome window dressing, but seeing characters like Barney and Robin just felt a little bittersweet. It's nice to see them again, but it's not doing a lot for them. Both bump into the series' lead Sophie at separate points in time, and their unique perspectives help her through her episodic problems. Their characters don't really advance or progress at all in these appearances, nor can they. Instead, we're given the status quo of our former leads in an outing that is otherwise forgettable in the grand scheme of things. Not too dissimilar to the show that these scenes are a part of. What I'm trying to say is that it's sad to see Robin love-struck and lonely, yearning for an ex years after the fact. I mean, it's nice to see Barney become more fatherly, and becoming a somewhat changed man since the birth of his daughter, but these aren't new offerings. They're old ones, but more current. Because of the forced relation to HIMYM, HIMYF spends a lot of its runtime referencing the first show. Now listen, sharing a continuity warrants references to the past. Easter eggs are fun and rewarding to fans of the franchise. Little winks and nods mean much more when you're in on the joke. But too much of a good thing can still be a bad thing, especially if that good thing is unjustified. A lot of these callbacks can feel like a lot for a show that has so little to do with its parent. If these characters were connected to the characters from that first show, then a lot of this would be more forgivable and even applaudable, bringing everything together, keeping your universe in sync with blasts from the past that paved the way for the present. If they were actively involved in each other's lives in some way, a lot of these references for me would be more welcome. But to have this random cast of characters coincidentally be involved in the lives of these complete strangers, it just felt like the show was doing a little bit too much. Having Jesse and Sid take Lily and Marshall's apartment, swords and all, bringing back famous locations like Goliath Corp, Farhampton, McLaren's Pub, bringing back the Pineapple, the Glen McKenna, the characters. All of these things were presented in short succession, which made the show feel like it was being suffocated by its own window dressing. For me, it was too much too soon in a show that had too little to do with the first one. It felt like How I Met Your Father was trying to borrow an audience instead of trying to create its own. Now, at this point in the video, you may have noticed that I've only talked about the characters from How I Met Your Mother, and not about any of the new characters and plot points from How I Met Your Father. And that's because this is how the discourse on this show usually goes. No one ever really talks about the new additions of the newer show. They talk about the returning old pillars of that original series, and how their stories were followed up upon in passing in this one. Having an audience watch your show just for cameos from characters from another show doesn't really sound like a formula for success. The series was surviving off the nostalgia of something else instead of trying to thrive as its own, never making an impression with its own identity, and instead constantly masking itself using something else more successful. Simply put, this show was always destined to live in the shadow of the first one. And even if it had been more successful, it was always going to be successfully eclipsed. Putting aside the past and trying to focus on the series' present doesn't help matters too much either. Now that's not to say it was all awful, because it wasn't. Hilary Duff made for a very likable lead. Sophie was a highlight of the show, being both fun to laugh with and at times at. She gave a really sweet performance of an imperfect person looking for love. I would actually even go out of my way to say that she's a lot less creepy of a lead than Ted. Ellen may just be one of the most awkward characters ever brought to screen. She's just so genuine in her goofiness. I would say that she's probably one of my favorite characters, even though she didn't get a lot of her own stories and an overexposure to the character
can be a lot of fun. Just a lot.
And Jesse had his fun moments. I don't think his character is particularly great, but the actor has good comedic timing, so he was fun to watch. The rest of the leads are not great. I don't think the actors are particularly bad, I just think that the parts they're playing are. Valentina and Charlie are the most insufferable leads I've ever seen in a show. I think they're meant to be obnoxiously awful, but, they're our leads. We have to deal with them on a constant basis. The show also wants to get the audience to actively like these characters, but they've never given us a reason to. Heartfelt moments between the two feel really hollow, and I think that they're a couple that you're supposed to be rooting for despite themselves, but I personally was always rooting against them because of themselves. I mean, toxic relationships can be done on sitcoms. There's comedy and conflict, but their biggest issue is that they're just not entertaining and they drag the plots down with them. Sid doesn't do anything for the plot. He's not a bad character, but he feels like he's on a completely different show. He has next to no chemistry with anyone on the cast save for maybe his wife. And I like the actor, but I don't know what they were going for with this character. Allegedly, he was supposed to be revealed to be the father. That wound up not happening, which is also something I should probably go out of my way to bring up now. How I Met Your Father ends with the lead still not meeting the father, or at least not disclosing the identity of said father. Much like its parent show, the lead was played by two different characters. They're actors! The past Sophie we see in the story is played by Hilary Duff, and the present Sophie we see telling the story is played by Kim Cattrall. And also much like in that case, it is impossible to believe these two to be one and the same. But I think that's amplified so much more here because we're not just hearing the actress, we're seeing her. And the two performances are just considerably different. Even their characterization doesn't feel all that alike. So despite both actresses doing well with what they were given to do, they're not good at conveying the same character through time. And that creates a little bit of a disconnect for me as a viewer. Generally speaking, half of the cast works and the other half doesn't. And even what works doesn't work well together. A lot of these working elements feel like they live independently of each other. See, I would watch a show following Sophie. I would enjoy a show on Ellie. I would check out a show about Sid and Jesse. But altogether, it just never feel like this gelled. What's even more unfortunate is that I think the show boasted a pretty likable reoccurring cast, and at times those guest appearances would overshadow the main cast of characters. Paget Brewster played Sophie's fun but dysfunctional mother, being such a disaster that it causes her daughter to take on more of a motherly role with her. Ellen's girlfriend Rachel just seemed to perfectly match her energy and add a whole new dimension to her character. And Josh Peck playing Sophie's ex-boyfriend honestly stole the show in every episode he was a part of. The new cast of characters didn't share the same chemistry their predecessors had, nor were their dynamics ever fleshed out or fully developed. Granted, the cast didn't have the time to get comfortable as their characters together, but I think this might have been a problem all the way back in the story-making process. Most of these characters don't feel fully realized. It's almost as if there wasn't any vision for these particular characters. They just expected the actors to figure that out on their own. I think that there was some real potential here, but the problem is that you had to dig for the gems through a lot of dirt, and even then sometimes they were hard to find. Granted, even if the show's potential shined through, it's doubtful it would have been as memorable as the show that it's desperately trying to emulate. Making this video has made me realize that I've made a lot of videos on this channel about the show How I Met Your Mother, and Unfortunately, for one reason or another, they've mostly been negative. Talking about all the things I don't like about that show, or all the things I don't like about its sequel show. But before I go, I think I'd like to talk about the things that I loved about that series. So if you like this video and would maybe like to see a retrospective on How I Met Your Mother, let me know in the comment section below by leaving a comment saying,
"Oh, which is How I Met Your Mother."
I am vengeance. I am the night, and that was V Infuso. Just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out.
So, if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too would like to become a V-generate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, nerds!
And if you're not joining the fun, you're in for one bad day. And you know what they say about having one bad day?
Catch him next time. Same bat time. Same bat channel.